Pumpkin, why do you, need to be in every podcast? Huh?
He just doesn't want to be forgotten about. It's not playtime right now, Pumpkin. Okay, hello everybody. It's Ashley, the best half of the Summers twins. Well, you messed it up if you start.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi everybody, it's Aspen, the better half of the Summers twins. And Ashley, the best half of the Summers twins. We are back in Pumpkin. He wants everyone to know that he's here. Yep. We are back with another episode of Twinspiration, and we are so excited about our guest today, which I know we say that every week, but that's because we keep having really great guests. Mm-hmm. But first, it's time for the Inspirational In It. And if you're new here, the Inspirational In It is our name for our Good News Minute. It's supposed to be Inspirational Minute, but without the M, so that alliteration. I love this good news story for today. It is about a man named Michael Armis Sr., who is a resident of Woodland, California. And one day, it was just a normal day, and he went into his bank, and he noticed one of his neighbors was speaking to the bank teller and seemed very irritated. And so he went up to see what was going on and noticed that the man, the former neighbor who was speaking to the teller, was threatening the teller that he was going to set off a bomb if he didn't get money from the bank, because he was basically trying to rob the bank. And so Michael asked what was going on, and the neighbor said that he didn't have a job, there was nothing left for him, and he just wanted to go to prison, which is very sad, but he was trying to rob the bank. And so Michael said that he took the man outside and gave him a hug, and the man just started crying and stopped trying to rob the bank. So he stopped a robbery by just being nice to this man. And I just thought that was a very sweet story, because instead of, being mad and judgmental, he was compassionate and saved the day. Yeah, that's amazing. A little compassion can go a long way. Mm-hmm. Of course, you have to be careful, because if someone actually has a bomb or a gun or something, might. But also, I think probably since he knew him, it was a little bit less. Yeah. And the article said that the police came and took him into custody for attempted robbery, and he wasn't actually armed. So that's good. Thank you for sharing that story, Ashley. You're welcome, Ashley. That was so awkward. I'm sorry. And now we would like to introduce our amazing guest for today. We got to sit down with Terry Tucker, who is a former Division I NCAA basketball player and a SWAT Team Hostage Negotiator. And he is a cancer warrior for the past 11 years. He also started a company called Motivational Check LLC, and he is a motivational speaker and author. He wrote a book called Sustainable Excellence, 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. And he just really has an incredibly uplifting outlook on life. His desire to put good out into the world and to uplift other people and support other people is so amazing, and something that I know I aspire to. And it was really an honor to hear his story and to get to talk to him. And so we're really excited for you all to get to hear what he had to say.
Are you guys in Colorado?
Yeah, we are.
Where in Colorado?
We're in Littleton, so just outside of Denver.
I'm in Lakewood.
Oh, really? Nice. Oh, wow. That's so cool. How long have you lived in Colorado?
About 10 years.
Oh, nice.
How about you guys?
We're natives. We were born here, so we go to school in Los Angeles, but we love Colorado. I don't think we're ever gonna stay in LA because it's not for us. Yeah.
When my wife and I were first married, we lived in Santa Barbara, which is, right above, about an hour hour north of LA. Mm. And I mean, one of the most beautiful places we've ever lived, but not a place that I would want to spend, my entire life.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, I guess we can get started with the interview if you're ready.
Sure.
Thank you so much for doing this. We're so excited to talk to you, and we were really excited when you reached out because it sounds like you have an amazing story. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm old, so I've got a lot of years on you. So, it's like when you're old, you kind of have a little bit of a story. So, but thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to talking with both of you.
Yeah, of course. Can you just tell our listeners a little bit about your background, who you are, and what you do?
Sure. So I am the oldest of three boys. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. You can't tell this from looking at me, but I'm 6'8" tall. And I actually went to college on a basketball scholarship. I went to a military college in South Carolina called the Citadel. When I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I'm really going to date myself now, but this is long before the internet was available to help people find employment. Fortunately, I was able to find that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department. That was the good news. The bad news was I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. Professionally, as I said, started out at Wendy's, then moved to hospital administration, and then made a major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of what I did when I was in law enforcement was and I know you're going to laugh at this because I'm 6'8", but I was an undercover narcotics investigator. And I was also a SWAT Team Hostage Negotiator. After my law enforcement career, I started a school security consulting business, coached girls high school basketball when we lived in Texas, became an author in 2020, but for the last 11 years now have been battling this rare form of cancer. And then I guess just finally, my wife and I have been married for 30 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
Oh, wow. Wow, good for her. That's amazing.
We're very proud of her.
I bet. So I guess since you talked about your family a little bit, just to go back to like the beginning, did you grow up in an environment? I mean, it sounds like if your dad and your grandma both were battling cancer, I'm sure that was really hard to experience. And did you witness a lot of resilience in your life as a kid that you think kind of propelled you into this career of motivational speaking and writing, or is that something that you kind of developed on your own?
No, I absolutely think a lot of that can be credited to our parents. As I said, I'm the oldest of three boys, so I have two brothers. We were all athletes. I had one brother who was a pitcher for the University of Notre Dame's baseball team, and my other brother was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers, the National Basketball Association. So we were all athletes, and I think our parents, I know our parents taught us the value of family, of caring for each other, of loving each other, of supporting each other. And my parents used to do what I call divide and conquer parenting. So, I would have a game on a certain night at this place, and my brother would have a practice on the same night at another place. So, my dad would go to my game and my mom would go to my brother's practices. And my parents, their life revolved around their three boys and athletics and all that. And they were always incredibly supportive. So I think they not only showed us, but they modeled how to be, what a good family should look like. And so when you see that, when you see your father and your grandmother dying, I had a choice. I said they were both dying when I graduated from college. I wanted to be in law enforcement, but my dad was against it. So I could have said, sorry, Dad, I'm going to go blaze my own trail and do my own thing. Or out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do and go into business. And so I did. And I sort of joke, I did what every good son did. I waited until my father passed away, and then I followed my own dreams. But, there was no doubt in my mind when my dad and my grandmother got sick that I was going to do whatever I needed to do to make sure that they were taken care of until they passed away.
That's really amazing that you made that sacrifice, and I can't imagine how hard that would have been to put your life on hold for them, but also to be seeing people that you loved going through that. And I'm curious, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but since it sounds like cancer has had a big impact on your life before you yourself went through it, do you think seeing other people go through it made it harder when you got the diagnosis that you had cancer?
I don't think so. Actually, I think it in a way, it made it easier for me when when my dad was diagnosed, he had end-stage breast cancer, which in a man back in the 1980s, they didn't really know how to treat a man with breast cancer. And so they told him pretty much to go home and die. And he lived another 3.5 years. And I believe the reason that he did was because he had a purpose. He was big into real estate. He loved real estate. He actually worked up till 2 weeks before he died. And I sort of tucked that in the back of my mind that, we're all going to, come to the end of our life. But so many people come to the end of their life and it's ugly. It's gruesome. They're down, they're depressed. And I didn't want to be like that. And I think the reason that I have been able to sort of deal with this 11-year battle with cancer is because I've had a purpose, because I've had something to do. And I don't just lay in bed and think how horrible this disease has been for me. And I learned that from my father. I learned that from watching my father go through that. So I think, regardless of what you see or what you experience in life, if you can learn something from it, no matter how good or bad it is, it usually ends up being somewhat good in a way.
I think that's a really great outlook. And it's really interesting that you say that your dad loved his work so much, even like to the point where he was working almost until he died, but also that he was so involved in your life when you were a kid and family was so important to him. And I think I can imagine that set a really great example of kind of finding a balance between work and life, and hopefully maybe encouraged you to kind of find your own purpose in life and find work that you were really passionate about. Even if he wasn't supportive of you going into law enforcement, I would imagine that maybe he taught you by example to seek out something that you were passionate about.
He did. And that was, there's sort of a backstory with me. My grandfather, his father, was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. And he was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. But my dad, who was an infant at the time, remembered the stories that my grandmother told of that, knock on the door of Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us, your husband's been shot. And when I, expressed that interest, my dad was absolutely not. You're going to go to college, you're going to major in business, you're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after. But that's what my dad wanted me to do. That's the life my dad wanted me to live. And, we've been talking about purpose. And I think so many people talk about purpose in the singular, like it's one thing. And I found in my life that I've had purposes, plural. And, when I was young, it was all about basketball. I felt that was my purpose. I lived it. I ate it. I drank it. I slept it. Basketball was everything for me. And then when I got out of college, yes, I went into the business world for a while, but that career in law enforcement was always something that was in my heart, something that was in my soul. And I felt that was my purpose. And now, as I'm more than likely coming to the end of my life, I feel my purpose has changed again, to put as much goodness, positivity, motivation, love back into the world as I possibly can. And I think a lot of people feel that, their purpose has to be their job or their occupation. And I don't think it does. I think your purpose could be, or your job could be, this is something over here that I do to pay the bills. But my purpose is, like you, to be podcast host or to run a theater group or whatever that, to paint, to write, whatever it is that you feel in your heart that you should do. And I'll end with this. I always tell, especially young people when I speak to them, that if there's something in your heart, something in your soul that you believe you're supposed to do, but it scares you, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of your life, the things you're going to regret are not going to be the things you did. They're going to be those things that you didn't do. And by then it's going to be too late to go back and do them.
I really love that. I had a guest speaker come to one of my classes one time, and they were talking about, ask yourself what scares you the most and then go out and do that. Or what would you do if you had no fear? And I think that's just such an important way to live, because I do think that when it comes to looking back on your life, you're going to regret the things that you didn't do. And I think that when you're in the moment of, especially when you're our age or just starting out in life, I think it's easy to get stuck in the idea that your purpose has to be singular and that you have to find what you're supposed to do and then commit to it and do it. And if you make the wrong choice, then you're kind of stuck because you've already committed yourself to that. And I think that it's just so important to remember that you aren't stuck and that you should follow your heart. And I think that it's something that I hope that everybody takes away from listening to you, that they should do what is fulfilling to them.
Yeah, and I feel like that's kind of a through line that we've heard from a lot of our guests, that people often start out maybe like after college or after high school thinking that they have to have one purpose in life and they have to figure out what they want to do when they're 18 and follow through with that for the rest of their life. And then I think a lot of people that turn out to be like the most inspiring, successful people are, and probably the happiest too, are the ones who realize that they don't have to stick to one thing and they can be any number of things that interest them and they should follow their passions. And even if it doesn't end up being their job or they don't end up being successful in it, I think that when you kind of let go of the idea of needing to succeed in everything and just really focus on what you're passionate about and what's important to you, I think that leads to a better life and probably more success in the end.
I would agree with you. I devoted an entire chapter in my book, and the title of the chapter is this, and I know I've done this in my life, and I'm not proud that I have, is that most people think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their minds. And I know I've done that where, I'd like to do this. Oh, wait a minute. Am I smart enough? Do I have enough information? Do I have enough intelligence? Or wait, what will people think about me if I fail? That's thinking with our fears and our insecurities. That's not thinking with our minds. And, yes, whoever you were talking about who, came and said, whatever you feel you're supposed to do, if it scares you, go ahead and do it. I would absolutely tell you to do that because I think that leads to resiliency. I think doing those difficult things in life makes you stronger, makes you more resilient, makes your mind callous, so to speak, so that you can handle difficult things in your life. And I've seen so many people, as I said, I'm much, much older than both of you are, but I've seen so many people live what I would say is a casual life. And because of their casual living, their goals, their dreams, their ambitions become a casualty of sort of that unplanned living. And I don't think you ever want that. As I mentioned, I've seen quite a few people die, both as my time in law enforcement and as a cancer warrior, and I'm going to make a huge generalization here, the people who seem to die what you and I would call happy or peaceful deaths seem to be the people that found their purposes in life and lived them, versus the people who go kicking and screaming, they want another month or they want another year. Those seem to be, again, huge generalization, seem to be the people that never looked for or found their purpose in life, and now coming to the end and realize, oh my gosh, I just let my life go by. And talking as an older person, life goes by pretty quickly. We are here for a very, very short period of time. So why spend your time being afraid of things? Why not just dive in and see where your life takes you?
So what would you say to somebody who might be listening to this right now and thinking, okay, I want to follow my purpose, or I want to not live a casual life, but I don't know how to do that?
I think we make life much harder than it is, than it needs to be. I guess I would say, first, what are your values? What is important to you in life? Is it character? Is it humility? Is it love? Is it family? Know your values, because we all go immediately to goals. I got to have goals, and here are my goals. But if your goals aren't attached to your values, if they're not anchored to something that is rock solid, that isn't going anywhere, and you've got to determine that for yourself. And the way I look at it is, what are you willing to give your life to? What are you willing to dedicate your life to, with the understanding that you may never be successful at it, that you may never get to the point where they say, you've made it, you're at the top of the mountain and stuff like that. Understand what your values are and then attach your goals to those. But the other part, and I think where it's really easy, is identify your unique gifts and talents. If you're not good at math, I would say probably accounting is not something you want to go into. We used to tell this to our daughter all the time: play to your strengths. What are your strengths? What do you enjoy? And then do that job. And jobs don't have to be, well, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. I read a book called Build for Tomorrow. It was written by a man by the name, I may mess up his first name. I think it was Jason or Jonathan Pfeiffer. And he's the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. And he talks about how he started out as a small-time newspaper reporter, but he always wanted to be an editor. So he left that and he went to work for a company, and he learned how to do this particular type of editing. And then once he learned that, he went to another company and learned a different type of editing. And then once he learned that, he went to another company and learned a different type of editing. And that set him up to be, the editor-in-chief of a major magazine. So, figure out what your gifts and talents are and then pursue those. And just jump in and see what happens. I took this job. Okay, I like it. I don't like it. Okay, maybe there's something else I want to learn. Okay, I'm going to move to another occupation or another field or something like that. Don't feel that you have to be stuck. And I think that's what happens. People get to a point in their lives and it's like, I don't feel like moving on. I'm comfortable where I am. The problem with comfort is when you're comfortable, you're not growing. When you're comfortable, you're not stepping outside those comfort zones and doing things that make you uncomfortable. When you're uncomfortable, you're growing because you're doing things that you don't know how to do. You're trying to figure it out. And I'll tell you one more story. There's a man by the name of Jesse Itzler, and he used to be he may still be a part owner of the Atlanta Hawks in the National Basketball Association. He's married to Sarah Blakely. I don't know if that name rings a bell for you, but Sarah Blakely owns the company called Spanx, which is a woman's undergarment kind of pro. And he tells the story about how when she was getting ready to start the Spanx business, he said if she would have had everything lined up, knew everything what was going on, she would have never done the business because somebody else would have beaten her to the punch of starting it. What he suggested and what she did was, okay, I kind of know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to jump in and figure it out as I go along. I'll get the marketing piece in place. I'll get the finance piece in place. I'll get the production in place. I'll get all that. But I'm going to jump in and do it now, understanding I don't have everything figured out. Nelson Mandela, the former president of South Africa, used to say, I never lose. I either learn or I win. So even if you fail, realize if you learn something, then you've kind of been successful at it.
Yeah, that's a great point for sure. So getting a little bit more into your story as an NCAA basketball player and then as a former police officer, can you tell us a little bit about anything that you feel like you learned in those experiences that has propelled you into kind of your outlook right now? And then also, since you were talking about when you find the point where you're comfortable, was there a point in either or both of those parts of your life where you found that you were comfortable and identified that it was time to move on? And how did you kind of figure that out?
Yeah, those are great questions. I guess one of the things, I'll start with sports, with athletics. I started playing basketball when I was 9 years old, and I played all the way up until I graduated from college when I was 21. And I think what team sports taught me, and for me it was sports. I think it can be whatever team you're on, whether it's your family, your colleagues, your friends, your church, whatever it is that you're with a group, that you have a team. What team sports taught me was the importance of being part of something that's bigger than yourself. You realize on a team that if you don't do your job, not only do you let yourself down, but you let your teammates down, your coaches down, your fans down, your parents down, etc. And if you think about it, the biggest team game that we're all on, or the biggest team game that we all play, is this game of life. And I am on a clinical trial drug now for my cancer treatment that more than likely is not going to save my life. But the reason I continue to take it and the reason I continue to go through the side effects of it is that I look at it like Well, maybe 5 years from now or 10 years from now, it'll save the life of somebody that I'll never know, that I'll never meet, based on what the data that the doctors are gleaning from my blood tests and my scans and things like that. And to me, that's being part of something that's bigger than yourself. So that's one thing I learned from sports. In terms of my law enforcement career, let me talk a little bit about what I learned as a hostage negotiator on the SWAT team. When I first started, and we were given a formula, and I'll give you the formula. It was 7, 38, 55. And I'm sure you're like, what the heck's this guy talking about? What's his formula here? So what that means is it's how we communicate. 7% of how we communicate with each other are the words that we use. 38% of it is the tone of voice that we use those words with. And then 55% of how we communicate is our body language and our facial expressions. So if you think of what a police officer does, almost 99% of what we did was face-to-face with another human being. So, whether I'm answering a radio run or, trying to break up a fight or something like that, I have the ability to see things. So if I'm talking to you, and you're kind of, looking around and stuff like that, he's looking around. Maybe he's going to run. Maybe he's going to try to get away. So I can do something. Or, if I'm talking to you and you're balling up your fists, like, well, does the guy want to fight me or something like that? So you can see visual clues. You can see these clues, and you can do what's appropriate. I can handcuff you. I can sit you down. I could put you in the back of my car, whatever was appropriate for why I was there. But as negotiators, I didn't have that 55% because we were not with the person we were negotiating with. Many times we were on the phone or, on the other side of a locked door or something like that. So if I said something and, I couldn't see what I said when the guy's face was like, oh, they roll their eyes like, what an idiot. I can't believe he said that. I couldn't see that. So we had to figure things out based on what people were saying, what they weren't saying, and how they were saying it. So that was incredibly important. And the other thing is the importance of listening. And I'm sure you're sitting there like, well, of course. I mean, we're listening right now. But what I'm talking about is the difference between listening to understand versus the listening to respond. So it might be, all right, Aspen, hurry up and say what you're going to say because I want to get my 2 cents in. That's listening to respond. I didn't hear a word you said because I'm thinking about what I'm going to say because I want to interject myself in this conversation. But if I say, oh, okay, Aspen, I understand. I hear what you just said. I may agree with you. I may not agree with you. But help me understand where you're coming from. Help me understand why you feel that way. Now we're connecting as human beings. And think about what we were doing, as negotiators on a SWAT team. Let's face it, if your house is surrounded by the police and you're talking to me, you're probably having one of the worst days, if not the worst day of your life. So I'm trying to develop a connection to you. Understanding where you're coming from helps me to be able to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know if you're like a religious person at all, but
I am.
Are and just at church this Sunday, the pastor was talking about how much better the world would be if we all really tried to understand each other rather than just making assumptions about each other. And I think especially in the social media age where it's so easy to want to respond to everything that we see, it can be really easy to just think about how we're going to respond and not trying to understand what people are saying and where they're coming from. And of course, I imagine that was a very important tool as a law enforcement officer, but I think just in life, that's such an incredibly important lesson. I was going to ask, I'm just so inspired by your outlook of wanting to put so much good into the world and your positivity about your health. Like when you talk about participating in this drug because you think that it could help somebody down the line, even though you don't necessarily think that it's going to do anything for you. And I'm just curious how you developed such a mindset of, being so focused on other people and how you can help others rather than just what you can do for yourself, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I talk sometimes about what I call my 3 Fs, and the F stand for faith, family, and friends. I have a very strong faith in God, have had a very strong faith in God my entire life. And I remember through my cancer journey, back in 2020, I had to have my leg amputated. And I found out I had tumors in my lungs, which I'm still being treated for. And about 8 months later, my doctor showed me my CAT scans. And I don't know how to read a CAT scan. I have no medical background whatsoever, but you can kind of look at it and say, well, gee, that doesn't look like it's supposed to be there, when you see it. And so I remember, I had these big tumors in my lungs and I had fluid all around the pleural spaces, sort of on the outside of my lungs. And I remember looking at my doctor and saying, how was I alive? And he kind of got this smile on his face and sort of shook his head and said, I don't know, because you shouldn't have been. Which said to me that God isn't done with me yet. When I die, where I die, how I die, way above my pay grade. Don't spend a lot of time worrying about the dying part of it. Spend a lot more time worrying about the living part of it. So faith has been a big, important part of my life. The other thing is family. And I have brothers. My mother is still alive, but it's just my wife and daughter. And when I found out, I had these tumors in my lungs, my doctor wanted to put me on chemotherapy. And I looked at him and I said, is it going to save my life? And he said, nah, probably not, but it might buy you some more time. And I was 8 years into this cancer journey and I'd already had my foot amputated. Now, I was going to have my leg amputated. And I said, well, if I'm going to die anyway, I don't know if I really want to take chemotherapy, but I'll go home and talk to my family. And it really did happen this way. It's a funny story, but it really did happen this way. So I go home and I start telling my wife and daughter, what's going on. And my daughter's like, all right, we need a family meeting. I'm like, family meeting? There's 3 of us. It's not like we got a board here or something like that, that we need to, sit around and talk about. But we ended up sitting around the kitchen table and individually talking about how everybody felt about me taking chemotherapy. And after that was done, my daughter's like, all right, let's take a vote. How many people want dad to have chemotherapy? And my wife and daughter raised their hand. I'm like, wait a minute. Am I getting outvoted for something that I don't want to do? But I remembered back in the police academy, our defensive tactics instructor used to have us bring a photograph of the people we love the most to class. And as we were learning different techniques to defend ourselves, we were to look at that photograph because he reasoned you will fight harder for the people you love than you will fight for yourself. So I ended up taking chemotherapy, not because I wanted to, but because I love my wife and daughter more than I love myself. And in hindsight, it was the right thing to do. It was a bridge that got me to the clinical trial drug that I'm on now. So, you do things for other people because you love them more than you love yourself. So that was the family part of it. And then finally, the friends part of it. I think when you have something major in your life, something happens, you really find out who your friends are. I talk about sort of the foxhole. I use the military analogy that, who do you want in a foxhole with you? When the battle's going on, who's the person you want next to you? And there were people that I thought would be there for me, that would be, would stand by me during this cancer journey that were just like, I can't deal with this. I was 51 years old when I was diagnosed with cancer, which is relatively young. And people were like, you're too young. I can't deal with that. And then there were people who I never expected to be in that foxhole with me that have never left me for the 11 years that I've been dealing with this. So when you have something bad in life, you really kind of figure out who are the people who are going to stand by you when that happens.
I mean, I think it definitely makes a lot of sense when you say that you do things for the people that you love because you love them more than yourself. But I feel like sometimes that's a hard thing for people to remember, especially when it's something so difficult. Like I would imagine agreeing to do chemotherapy, even if you wanted to do it for your family. That's not just like, I'm going to go to the store for you or I'm going to make your bed for you or something simple like that. And so I guess I'm curious if when you were first diagnosed with cancer, if you still had that outlook of doing things for other people and making it about other people and kind of trusting that God had a plan for you, or if you were more afraid or cynical or upset that that happened to you.
So just a quick background. Well, I have a rare form of melanoma, and most people think of melanoma as too much exposure to the sun affects the melon, the pigment in your skin. I have a rare form that has nothing to do with sun exposure. It appears on the bottom of your feet or the palms of your hands. And so 2012, I'm a girls' high school basketball coach in Texas. I have a callus break open on the bottom of my foot, right below my third toe. And initially, I don't think much of it because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. But after a few weeks of it not healing, I made an appointment and went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine. And he took an x-ray and he said, Terry, I think you have a cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did. And he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it, no dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave either one of us concern. But fortunately or unfortunately, he sent it off to pathology to have it looked at. And then 2 weeks later, I received the call from him. And as I said, he was a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he was having explaining to me what was going on, the more frightened I was becoming. Until finally, he just laid it out for me. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years, and I have never seen the form of cancer that you have. You have this rare form of melanoma. So I think when I was initially diagnosed, I went through all the stages that we would associate with grief. I mean, first it was denial. I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right in my life. I've exercised. I eat right. I've done all this. And then it was, you get mad. And it was like, I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right in my life. How can I possibly have cancer? And our daughter was in high school at the time. Then it was a sort of bargaining with God. Just let me live long enough to see her graduate from high school. And then I got down. I got depressed. And then I got to a point where it was like, okay, you've got a choice now, how you want to handle this, how you want to attack this. And I talk about, it sucked, but I had to embrace the suck, for lack of a better term. I didn't like what, these cards that I'd been dealt, but I had to play these cards to the best of my ability. And I made a decision very early on that I was never going to take out my misfortune or my pain or, my fear on a doctor or a nurse or a therapist or anybody who was trying to help me. And I know why people do that. And I've seen a lot of people do that. They're afraid. They're scared. They don't have anything, they don't have a faith. They don't have anything they can turn to in that time. And so they lash out at their doctor. Or they lash out at their nurse. I'm not saying I've been perfect. I on one or two occasions, I have done that. But I made a decision to I'm not blaming somebody. I'm not blaming anybody because I got cancer. And that was the interesting thing. I've seen so many people. Let's just use, goals. You start down the road toward a goal and you butt up against an impediment. Something gets in your way and you can't get over it, around it, or through it. And so you quit, you give up. But we just don't quit. Now we got to blame somebody. We got to blame our parents, or we got to blame our boss, or we got to blame our station in life. Very few people take personal responsibility for their own success and happiness. So when I got cancer, people were like, well, who do you blame? I'm like, what do you mean, who do I blame? Well, you got to blame somebody because you got cancer. I said, no, I don't blame anybody. And then when they find out I have a faith life, they're like, oh, you must blame God. And I used to joke with them. I'd be like, no, I don't think God got up on a Tuesday morning, checked his to-do list and said, Terry Tucker, cancer today. I don't think that at all. But I do think what God has done is given me the strength to continue to go on. I've got one leg. I'm a flawed human being that is trying to carry his message forward with my disease. And that's kind of the way I look at it right now.
That's really inspiring. We had another guest on a few weeks ago who also was battling cancer, and she was talking about how it completely changed her outlook to living life gratefully rather than kind of like seeing the bad. And it sounds like that is something that you really developed. I mean, it almost sounds like you have taken the outlook of seeing your cancer as a gift that God has given you to be able to share your message with the world. And I think that's just such an incredible outlook. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. I think cancer has definitely taught me things. And I think two things that it's taught me is, number one, I don't think you really know yourself until you've been tested by adversity in your life, some form of adversity. And to go to your point, yeah, I think cancer has made me a better human being. It's made me appreciate things that were important. I mean, think about it in the West, and I do podcasts with people all over the world, but what you see in the West is we seem to think that we're born empty. And that, when we finish school and we get out into life, that our job is somehow to fill up this empty vessel. I've got to get a good education. I've got to get a good job. I've got to get a nice wife, or, for me, it's a wife. I've got to have good kids. I've got to live in a nice house, drive a good car, and so we fill ourselves up with all this stuff. And we think that by doing that, it's going to make us happy. It's going to make us fulfilled. And what I've come to understand is it's just the opposite. We're not born empty. We're born full. We're born with everything we need to be successful in life already inside of us. And instead of thinking our job should be to fill ourselves up, I think just the opposite. Our job should be to empty ourselves out for the betterment of ourselves, our family, our friends, our society, our God, whatever you believe that to be. And I think if you look at it that way, it's not what I can get, it's what I can give. And if you look at it that way, I think you're going to be a whole lot happier in your life.
Yeah, I think that is a really great quote, I guess, because I feel like we often think so much about what's going to make me happy, what's going to make me feel successful, what do I want with my life. And I think that when you really stop to think about what is, at least I think for both of us, when we think about what's important to us, it's helping other people and putting good into the world. I hope that a lot of people feel the same way, and I think that the world would be a much better place if we all focused a little bit more on what we could give to each other instead of what we want and what would make us happy.
I agree. And you both are women of faith, and I think you understand that, that God put us here. There's an old quote from Mother Teresa that says, God never asked us to be successful. He asked us to be faithful. Mm-hmm. And if you look at it that way, it's true. And I heard another quote that said, how does God feel about money? Just look at the people who he gives it to. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek sort of quote, but it's not about the things. My wife and I have seen so many people that we would look at and say, that person is incredibly successful. They have multiple homes and they have more money than they'll ever need in their life. And yet they're miserable. They're not happy. They're not fulfilled. It's like, is this all there is to life? No, life is about what you give. It's not about what you get.
I know we've already taken a lot of your time, so we will wrap up soon, but I do want to talk just a little bit about how you got into motivational speaking, and you're also an author, and kind of what started you down that path, and then I guess just how you feel about what you do and how you find fulfillment from that.
Sure. So I made the brilliant business decision to start a motivational speaking business just as COVID hit. Mm-hmm. So like so many other companies and organizations, I had to figure out a different way to deliver my message because nobody was doing anything, certainly nothing in person during COVID and even nothing virtually at that point in time. Mm-hmm. So somebody had reached out to me and said, would you like to be a guest on my podcast? And I said, sure. What's a podcast? I had absolutely no idea what a podcast was. And so they said, well, it's kind of like having a conversation, but we record it and then we put it on social media. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. I was so scared. I was so nervous. I remember I put Post-it notes with answers to the questions all around the camera. And the individual would ask me a question and I would kind of lean in and read the Post-it note. And I was like, I was horrible. I was terrible. I was lousy at it. And I remember a little while later, I was talking to the publisher of my book. And I said, I listen to every podcast I've ever been on because I want better stories. I want to not, I list how many times I say, or that. I want to be a good guest so the podcast hosts feel that their time was well spent. He said, no, Terry, you don't understand. It's not about being good. It's just about not sucking. And I said, well, thanks for the title of my next book, Just Don't Suck. I'm like, that's great. Thank you for that. But I said, no, that's not what it's about for me. I want to be good at that. I want to do that. So that was kind of what started the podcasting. And then as things have opened up now with people doing either virtual or in-person events, I've had the opportunity to speak to different groups. The book, was kind of people were suggesting I write a book. There's an old joke that says when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So I'm not going to tell you that God ever spoke to me. Never did. But I think what God does is he puts people in our path that start making the same suggestions. Like, hey, you should write a book. Hey, you should write a book. Hey, you should write a book. And I was originally, no, I'm not an author. What do you, I'm an athlete. I'm not an author. But when enough people started to make that suggestion, I thought, well, maybe I ought to pay attention to this. Maybe this is God's way of saying, hey, dummy, I'm telling you to write a book, write the book. And I always say I wrote it, but I think it was inspired by something that was much greater than myself. And the book was really born out of two conversations. One was with a former player that I had coached in high school who had moved to Colorado with her fiance, and she and her fiance and my wife and I had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner, I'm really excited that you're living close and I can watch you find and live your purpose. And she got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she said, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth, using your unique gifts and talents, and living that reason. So that was one conversation. And then I had a young man reach out to me on social media and ask me what I thought were the most important things he should learn, not to just be successful in his job or in business, but to be successful in life. And I didn't want to give him that, get up early, work hard, help others. I didn't want to give him that. Like, not that those aren't important, they really are, but I wanted to see if I could go deeper with him. So I spent some time, and I took some notes, and eventually I had these kind of 10 thoughts, these 10 ideas, these 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I was like, well, I got a life story that fits underneath that principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates this principle. So literally during the 3 to 4 month period where I was healing after I had my leg amputated, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And that's how the book, Sustainable Excellence, the 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life, came to be.
Wow, I love that story. That's really amazing. So we have 2 questions that we always like to ask all of our guests at the end. First of all, you've already shared a lot of words of wisdom, but do you have a favorite inspirational quote that you want to share with our listeners?
Let me give you 2.
Okay.
First one is from Ernest Hemingway, a great writer, who said, life breaks everyone, and afterwards, many are stronger at the broken places. I love that quote. And then the other one is from probably one of my favorite authors, Mark Twain, who said, the 2 most important days of our lives are the day we're born and the day we figure out why.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I like that one. And then our last question is just kind of a fun one, but since we're twins and our podcast is a lot about twins, we always like to ask our guests, if you could have an identical twin, do you think that you would want one?
That's such a hard question. I mean, you guys are twins, so I mean, you know what it feels like to be a twin. I have my middle brother. We're 13 months apart, so we're pretty close in age. And we're close, we've been close our whole lives. Both my brothers and I are close. How am I going to answer that? I would say no. I would say no. I would not want a twin. I'll probably regret saying that, but I mean, both of you, I'm sure. So let me ask you, do you think the same thoughts? Do you feel the same emotions at the same time from seeing the same things, or are you pretty much both individuals, yet you're still twins?
I think it's kind of both. I think there's a lot of times where we'll think the same thing or we'll say the same thing at the same time and we don't realize we're going to, but I think we also have a lot of differences. So yeah, it kind of depends, because like we can have conversations without really ever saying anything because we just know what each other's thinking, but we also react a lot differently to things and are often surprised that one of us has a different opinion about something. So, but as twins, we don't really know what it would be like as not twins. So yeah. I think it's hard on either side to know
whether you would really like it or not.
But I will say our parents were on the podcast, and our last guest was a mother of twins, and both of them said that they would not want to be a twin. So they probably know best because they have kids who are twins.
Yeah, they've seen it up close.
Now, do you have other siblings? Do you have brothers and sisters in addition, or is it just the two of you?
No, it's just us.
Yeah, we begged and begged for a little sister our whole lives, but we never got one.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I think our daughter wanted a brother or a sister, but I my entire police career, I worked nights. My wife worked days, so you can figure out, when you never see each other, it's kind of hard to have another child.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to say or bring up before we wrap up?
Let me just tell you one more story, if I may. So I had a nurse recently who asked me what it was like to have my foot amputated in 2018 and to have my leg amputated in 2020. And I told her, I said, it certainly has not been easy. I am still kind of learning how to walk again. I learned how to use a prosthetic well enough to walk my daughter down the aisle about a year and a half ago for her to get married. But what I told her was, it's kind of falling from my height. When you're 6'8", learn to walk again, falling, not a good thing. People get hurt in that kind. But what I told her was, cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my mind. It can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are, Ashley. That's who you are, Aspen. That's who everybody who's listening to us is. We really are our heart, our mind, and our soul. And we spend a lot of time on this body. And I'm not telling you not to. I'm not, absolutely go to the gym, absolutely eat right, absolutely, get enough rest, reduce stress, all that kind of stuff. You should absolutely do that. But what I am suggesting is maybe every day spend a little bit more time working on your heart, your mind, and your soul. This body's going to go away. You're going to die. It's going to decay. But I think your heart, mind, and soul are things that are eternal and will live on after you. So I think we should spend more time working on them while we're here.
That's something that I think everybody could use a reminder about. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much for agreeing to do this and for this interview. I really feel honored to have gotten to talk to you. You're such an inspiration. And I just really appreciate you sharing your story. I have to imagine it takes a lot of courage for you to do this over and over again. And we're just really grateful for you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. I always say it's nice people like you that allow me to come on their podcast and have a conversation with them. And if that podcast makes a positive difference in somebody's life, then as far as I'm concerned, today's been a good day.